I don't have a problem with carbohydrates. I have a problem with people consuming a lot of carbohydrates and then not moving. But did you know that the carbohydrates that you're consuming and not utilizing cross through the blood-brain barrier? There's some interesting new science that took a look at how sugar and carbohydrates in excess turn into triglycerides, and those triglycerides go through the blood-brain barrier. Let's break it down. Now, before I dive into the nitty-gritty of this study, I put a link down below for seed. Now, if you're looking for a good probiotic, seed is called a synbiotic. Okay, so it is a combination of a prebiotic fiber along with probiotic strains in one capsule. So it has a capsule inside of a capsule. So when we're talking about trying to control appetite, when we're trying to talk about improving the utilization of glucose or fats at a cellular level, we have to look no further than our microbiome. Okay, so that link down below will save you 15% off your entire order through Seed. Okay, so if you try out that synbiotic, you'll notice within a few days your appetite starts to change a little bit. In fact, I noticed my entire palate changed. I didn't crave sweet things as much. So it's really, really interesting. So anyhow, big thank you to them, and that link is down below. Again, saves you 15% off. And for the record, they're funding a lot of microbiome research. So they're really putting their money where their mouth is, which is why I appreciate them so much. So that link down below, first line of the description. So this study took a look at triglycerides, and it radioactively labeled them. Now, a triglyceride is the storage form of fat. So you're probably thinking, I thought this was about sugar. What does this have to do with triglycerides? A lot. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So what they found when they labeled triglycerides, it means that they were able to watch them inside the body. So they radioactively labeled triglycerides, and then they noticed that when they circulated around the body, they didn't just circulate around the body, they ended up in the cerebral spinal fluid. The cerebral spinal fluid is the fluid that circulates around our brain to flush out metabolites. So our triglycerides were ending up in our brain. Okay, well, it doesn't stop there. Okay, first of all, what that tells us is that these triglycerides cross through the blood-brain barrier. But secondly, they found that it impacted leptin resistance in the hypothalamus. So what that means is it actually made us more hungry. It was making us more leptin resistant. So now we're finding out that high circulating triglycerides can impact our hunger, can impact obesity. What the heck is going on here? But what does this have to do with a carbohydrate? Well, that's where we have to look no further than a study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So with this study, they put subjects on a lower carb diet, or they put subjects on a low-fat, moderate-calorie, high-carbohydrate diet. Okay, what they found is that the low-carbohydrate diet had a 20% reduction in triglycerides, and the lower-fat, higher-carbohydrate diet only had a 4% reduction in triglycerides. Does this just simply mean that a low-carb diet is better for triglyceride levels? Maybe if you're inactive. We'll get to that in a minute. But what it does tell us is, well, it illuminates some of the mechanistic actions here. Okay, so when you eat a bunch of sugar, what happens is you have a spike in insulin. Well, this spike in insulin doesn't just let sugar into a regular cell in the muscle, it also lets sugar into a fat cell. And that is going to drive up triglyceride levels because now you have storage form of fat increasing by way of insulin and sugar or carbohydrates. This is why so many people that consume excess sugar end up with high triglycerides, even if they're eating a low-fat diet. So yes, a high sugar, high carbohydrate diet, when you do not use that fuel, can absolutely drive up your triglycerides. And now we're seeing that high circulating triglycerides cross through the brain and impact our leptin levels. Okay, well, what happens in the case of a lower carb diet? Well, it's not necessarily a low carb diet that's the magic. It's an appropriate amount of carbs for the activity that you're doing, right? So if you're consuming lower carbs and your insulin levels are lower, you're able to liberate those triglycerides and use them as fuel rather than just have them circulating. So on one hand, you have triglycerides being created from excess carbohydrates, and on the other hand, you still have triglycerides, but they get broken down and used as fuel instead, and they never have the opportunity to cross into the blood-brain barrier and into your cerebral spinal fluid. So in a very simple way of what's happening is if you're not using the carbs that you're consuming, not even immediately, but just in general, then yes, it's going to be an excess fuel. Now here's the caveat. If you overeat fat and you don't burn fuel, those fats can absolutely be circulating lipids that can cause a problem too. But what we're noticing now is that the triglycerides are really an interesting issue. And those are something that are very strongly correlated with sugar consumption and overconsumption of refined starches. So if you're looking to restore your leptin levels and stop the hunger and restoke that metabolism, maybe the best thing that you can do is lower the carbohydrate content and increase your activity. Or at the very least, if you can't give up the sugar, exercise a little bit more and burn it up. I'll see you tomorrow.